Hello guys, this is your friend Naruto Audio Fanfics and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is what if Naruto returns with a wife and have a child? And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. On a worn dirt road not too far away from Konoha, two figures wearing gray hooded cloaks slowly walked towards the walls of the said village. Both were close to the same height, but it was easy to tell them apart as one was obvious female due to the cloak she was wearing was a little tight around her chest, revealing that she had somewhat large. Her eyes were a deep emerald with dilated iris and a little off tilt to give them a slight animalistic look to them that was almost like that of a cat. There were a few strands of blonde hair over her tomboyish face. She also wore a Hittite on her forehead, but was difficult to tell what village she belonged to, but was obvious to see she was a Nukenin as there was a slash on her Hittite. Seems like you are back home. The other nodded lightly at the girl's statement. The other was harder to tell until you got a good look at the face. The face was obviously male with tan skin with 3 cleft whisker marks on each cheek. Another defining characteristic about him was his piercing electric ocean blue eyes that seemed to have lost some vibrancies in them. Just like the girl, he had a few strands of darker blonde hair covering his forehead, which also had a Hittite on his forehead, but it was easier to identify as it was Leaf, meaning he was from Konoha. Yeah, we're finally here. You sure you want to be here? I'll be alright. There is nothing we can do now, let's just hope everything goes smoothly. The girl interrupted him quickly, not wanting to give him the impression that she didn't want to be there. Truthfully, she didn't want to, but she would do so as it was his home and that was enough for her. Shaking her head of that thought, she walked beside her fellow blonde as they reached the entrance of the village and the guard stopped them. Halt. State your names and purpose here. The blonde-haired male looked over at the guard that had stopped them before tapping his forehead lightly to reveal his Hittite to the said man. The said man also was able to see the features of the young male's face and instantly recognized who he was. So you're back. Tsunade-sama is expecting you, but who is this and where is Jiraiya-sama? The young male sighed lightly as he heard Jiraiya's name before shaking his head lightly as he looked over the girl. She is with me and is here to see the Hokage. The guard Chunin looked at him with some doubt in his eyes, but looking into the piercing blue eyes that were colder than he remembered forced his hand as something was going on. Moving out of their way, both silently walked through the gate and headed for the tallest tower in the center of the village. In the said tallest tower in the village of Konoha, a woman with dusty blonde hair in 2 pigtails was growing agitated and quickly. And her problem wasn't the massive amount of paperwork on her desk, but the fact that neither her ex-teammate or her technically adopted grandson, baby brother had not returned. Neither of her 2 apprentices could blame her as it had been 4 years since both of them had left and they were supposed to return after 2.5. They were also very worried about the 2 as they couldn't figure out why they had taken so long to return. Especially Sakura, as she was beginning to realize that she might had very well lost a second teammate and the thought was almost unbearable for her, so she put it on the back of her mind and did her best not to think about it. Even still, it was eating away at her not having the chance to make it up all the years of horrible treatment to the blonde. Sighing once more, Tsunade signed another paper automatically, much to the worry of both her apprentices as she hadn't even looked at the papers lately. If someone wanted to have her resign, all they would have to do is put a paper of her resignation on the top and she would sign it without second thought. Shaking her head lightly, Shizune walked silently over to Tsunade before placing her hand on her shoulder, making the large Hokage jump lightly as she looked up at her. Shizune refrained from sighing as she looked down at her master. Tsunade-sama, if you don't feel like working today, you don't have to. Both Sakura and I can handle this. Go ahead and. Before she could finish, the door opened to reveal both Kaharu and Homura. Shizune refrained from growling along with Sakura as both were trying to get Tsunade to rest as there was no doubt the Gondime Hokage was extremely tired. Neither of them noticed this, but did notice the killing intent they were releasing towards them. They easily threw it off as they walked up to the desk as they had been exposed to greater killing intents. Tsunade sighed deeply as she knew why they had come this time and really didn't want Sakura or Shizune to be here for it. Looking over at them, she had half a mind to tell them to leave but didn't get the opportunity to do so as Homura spoke up. Tsunade, it has been a year and a half since Jiraiya should have returned along with him. Tsunade refrained from clenching her fist and sending the man through the wall as she knew it wouldn't look very good for her to punch an old man that was 30 years older than she was. Kaharu noticed the twitching in Tsunade's face and body and quickly took over as Homura really didn't like Naruto. Tsunade-san, I know you want to wait for more time believing that Jiraiya will return with him, but something could have happened. I'm not saying to mark him as a Nukenin like Homura is here, I'm just saying to send a group to search for them. And before you say we have a shortage of shinobi, I'm well aware of that fact. But you can spare a few to search for them. Nodding lightly at her, Tsunade sighed as she knew it was the truth. In fact, she had been sending a few to search for them, but no one could find a trace of them. She absently cursed Jiraiya for not giving her at least a schedule on where they would be. Shaking her head lightly, she sighed as she looked over at Kaharu while ignoring the fuming Homura, though he stopped when all four kunoichi glared at him. But I haven't been able to send any Junin or Anbu to look for them. I was thinking about sending Kakashi to look for them, but he's been out on missions too often. Kaharu nodded lightly as she understood that reason before coming up with a plan of her own. Why not send a few of our new Chunin along with some of his friends? Most of them are given mediocre tasks anyways, so it shouldn't be a problem to send them. I've thought about it, but you know Jiraiya as well as I do, and when he said 2 to 3 years I had a feeling it would take longer. I still want to believe they ran into something important and forgot to send a message to me. It wouldn't be surprising considering the two of them. But you are right, it needs to be done soon. Tsunade answered quickly as she had honestly thought about doing that and was thinking about it more seriously than before as it was taking way too long for them to arrive. Kaharu could only nod, knowing Jiraiya all too well along with his pervert hobbies and his habit of being chronically late. But she also knew that Jiraiya wouldn't have been this late without contacting someone. So she was slightly concerned for her son. It wasn't very well known, but she was the Toad Hermit's mother and had requested that Sarutobi be his sensei as she knew he would be the perfect one for him. Though she distanced herself from him later in her life, they still had a decent mother-son relationship. I know, but I would still like to see a larger search for them. Maybe using the Inazuku along with the Aburame heirs. This would be an excellent warm-up mission since I know you have picked both of them for the Uchiha's retrieval when Uzumaki-san is back. Tsunade could only sigh lightly at Kaharu, knowing why she was so persistent. Seeing that she wasn't going to be giving up any time soon as she was worried about both of them as well, she was about to cave in when there was a knock on the door. Sitting straight up in her chair as the door opened, Kotetsu popped his head in with a blank, yet somewhat relieved face. Tsunade-sama, Uzumaki-san has finally arrived along with another. Everyone, except Homura, looked extremely relieved at this as Tsunade motioned for the Chunin to bring him in along, with who she probably thought was Jiraiya. She was mildly surprised when two cloaked figures entered the room and she instantly knew that Jiraiya wasn't one of them as one was definitely female. She wouldn't have put it past Naruto to be in his no jutsu form, but she knew the other wasn't Jiraiya as he wasn't tall enough and was around the height Jiraiya reported Naruto to be at in his last letter, if not a little taller. Sitting up even straighter than before, she looked at the one she believed, and knew was Naruto. Naruto, what's going on? Who is this and where is Jiraiya? Both cloaked figures flinched very slightly that only Kaharu, Homura and Tsunade could notice it. Sighing lightly, Naruto slowly slid his hood down to reveal his electric blue eyes. At first, everyone was slightly surprised as his eyes didn't hold the vibrancies they once did and his face seemed to be hardened compared to the happy-go-lucky face he had 4 years ago. They quickly adjusted to it as they knew something had to happen to have acting like this. I'll explain everything Ba-chan, but I need to get some things out of the way first. Sorry for not sending any messages as when we headed back the conditions were rather hellish with the Akatsuki and all. But I'm back and to answer your second question, this my fiancé, ni Yugito. Everyone's eyes widened hearing what Naruto had said and flinched lightly at the Akatsuki and hellish part. Once he was finished, all eyes slowly turned to the girl in the room. Seeing that he had introduced her to them and they were all looking at her in shock, the girl slowly slid of her hood to reveal her slightly feral, cat-like face and slashed Kumogakure Hitai 8. At first sight of her face, Sakura was slightly jealous as the girl seemed to have a natural beauty to her, but quickly put that aside as she had heard Naruto saying that she was his fiancé and was very interested, as was mostly everyone in the room, on how it happened. The only two that didn't were Homura, as he disliked Naruto, and Kaharu, as she wanted to know about her son first. Tsunade quickly overcame her shock at what Naruto's head as she noticed the Hitai 8 as well. Naruto, as much as I want to know what happened, I need to know where Jiraiya is. Naruto flinched once more as he heard Jiraiya's name as she said that, along with Yugito looking down in shame. Seeing their reactions, both Tsunade and Kaharu felt their stomachs turn as they knew something had happened and it wasn't good. And seeing that Naruto was trying to find a way to say what they felt made their stomachs turn even worse than before. Taking a deep breath as Yugito walked beside him, Naruto looked Tsunade directly in the eyes as he spoke in an almost emotionless voice as he kept his emotions from surfacing. Jiraiya-sensei is dead. The room dropped several degrees as silence followed, with Naruto's words hitting everyone like a ton of bricks. Everyone was the same as the loss of possibly one of the greatest shinobi the village had the privilege of being witness to had finally moved on. But two in the room were at a loss for words. Tsunade couldn't believe it. Jiraiya, the strongest in the village, including herself as she wasn't arrogant and knew that Jiraiya could beat her if it came down to it, was dead. The pervert that would hit on her, even after losing both Nawaki and Dan. It wasn't that he was being insensitive, it was just the only way he knew how to try and cheer Tsunade up. The same man that had single-handedly kept them in the Iwa Kono War when the Yondaime was trying to invent the jutsu that would bring the war to an end and be feared by every nation to this day. He had finally met his match and was unable to do what he did best, to find a way to succeed against overwhelming and almost impossible odds. Which was a trait he oddly searched for in his apprentices, seeing that he only took two, which happened to be the Yondaime and Naruto. Just like Tsunade, Kaharu was in complete shock to learn that her son was no longer among the living. Sure, she disliked what he had become, but that was because he was a pervert and let his perverted ways take over his life. But looking past the perverseness, she felt great pride for him as he was a great shinobi and never once gave up in what he believed. To hear that he was dead and that he had died before she did was heartbreaking, but it was the way the life of a shinobi worked. All she could do was ask to hear how he died. How? How did it? Naruto once again flinched at what the elder said, having a slight idea who she was to Jiraiya. Sighing lightly, he turned to Yugito, who nodded lightly at him, before turning towards her. I would like to tell you he died doing what he loved most, but dying being pummeled by dozens of women wearing towels was something that wasn't going to happen for him. But before I can tell you how he died, both Yugito and I need to explain the events happening up to it. Seeing everyone nod lightly and look towards both of them as Yugito was giving him a slightly dirty look, not wanting to have to explain her part in what happened. Shaking her look off, Naruto sighed as he began to explain. Well, it began when both Sensei and I were allowed into Kumogakure for a week as they were trying to learn more of Akatsuki. We ended up in the Kumogakure after the Raikage called us in as they had two Jinchuriki like myself. While everyone in the room knew of Naruto's status, each was quite surprised to see how openly he had admitted he was one, not knowing that Sakura knew he held Kyuubi. Anyways, we graded the threats they were in, and after a little fight with Yugi-chan here, I had my handed to me. At this, Yugito rolled her eyes at him before quickly picking up where he left off. Only because Jiraiya-sama stopped the fight and you're going to bore them with details that are unnecessary. They want facts, not a story. They'll learn the rest on their own time. Naruto could only shrug as he was a better storyteller and would just go on and on for a while. Anyways, picking where he left off, they stayed in our village for about 2.5 weeks and Naruto got to know Kurabi and I better. Just as they were leaving, the Raikage issued a mission to Kurabi and me along with a few Anbu, to kill Naruto and Jiraiya. Hearing this, everyone's attention began to lift, knowing it was getting to the part where everything was about to get interesting when Naruto pitched in. And being as we shinobi are nothing but weapons, they carried out their mission. But when they got there, Yugi-chan warned both of us what was going to happen. During the time I stayed there, we fell for each other and she couldn't let this happen. So thanks to her information, we were able to dispatch the Anbu easily. Kurabi was a different story. We had no idea of the powers of the eight tail. All in the room were quiet as Naruto stopped, unable to take their attention of them even if a fly flew right in front of their face. Yugito sighed as she rubbed her wrist lightly. The said hand looked rather withered, but she seemed to ignore it as she looked straight into the eyes of the Gondime Hokage before she sighed deeply. Kurabi was unstoppable, even for Jiraiya-sama. Both Naruto and I were holding a mock battle with our Biju's powers, hoping that Jiraiya could quail him, but we were wrong. He called out six tails, and with his training from two different Raikages and brother to another, it was obvious he was superior to him. Jiraiya-sama didn't last 5 minutes before the fatal wound was given. Naruto interrupted as his eyes darkened to a point where it looked as if clouds had settled in. This caught everyone off guard, but not as much as the chakra that seemed to be radiating off of the teen. It was far more than what they anticipated as he stood by Yugito's side. Afterwards, I fought Kurabi and defeated him using my father's personal technique. The very same that ended the war with Iwagakure. Soon as he said that, all eyes widened in the room, knowing what the jutsu he was speaking of was, and Tsunade spoke out in disbelief for all of them. You know it. You know the Hiraishin. Naruto confirmation was only a small nod. That small nod had sent a shiver down Homaru's spine as the others looked awestruck. As they slowly recovered, Tsunade motioned for Naruto to continue, but with a small twinkle in her eye as she refrained from showing her pride. Picking up where he left off, Naruto continued with the story with Yugito still rubbing her wrist. Soon after Jiraiya's last words, we headed back here as that was one of his last wishes as well. But it turned out to be far more difficult than I expected as I ran into Itachi and Kisame again and defeated them, only killing the latter. Itachi instead came with us, wanting to carry out the final part of his mission. He could see the widening of both Homaru's and Kaharu's eyes, but said nothing as Tsunade looked in confusion but had caught the eyes of both the elders. He took us into hiding as we evaded the Akatsuki coming after us with everyone they had to spare. Apparently they were afraid that I knew the Hiraishin and wanted to take me down right then and there. Itachi, knowing this, had the only other person in the Akatsuki he could trust to help us, a blue-haired woman known as Konan. The four of us realized that there was little chance of succeeding in any attempt, so we did it in my classic style. Head on. Strangely enough, it worked as they weren't expecting it. With Konan and Itachi opening the sealed passageway of the base for us, we stormed their secret base and attacked. I was able to wipe out the money grub Kakuzu and the puppet master Sasori as Itachi completely incinerated the immortal Hidan with his Amaterasu. Yugito was able to catch Deidara by surprise as Konan backstabbed her husband, Pain, and killed him quietly without us having to worry about him. Zetsu wasn't much of a problem as he fled the scene, but the final one was Tobi, better known as Uchiha Madara, one of the founding fathers of Konoha. Only he believes Konoha to have betrayed him, and in a sense it did from the story he told us. In the battle, Itachi and Konan both fell to him as we were unable to find a way to even scratch the Uchiha. All hope seemed lost as not even the Hiraishin was fast enough to harm him. Naruto continued as he gripped his fist tightly. Continuing to rub her wrist as if it was bothering her, Yugito looked up and continued surprising the others as Naruto had pretty much taken over. It wasn't until he had started the extraction on me as he continued battling Naruto when we found a way to take him down. The shackle he put my hand had kept me still for the extraction, but he didn't pin me down or knock me out thanks to Naruto. I found out that I couldn't break it no matter what I did, so I cut off my hand. Everyone other than Naruto and Yugito looked queasy at the thought. Sakura was actually the only one that had puked luckily enough into the garbage. The others knew her reasoning behind it. For survival, a lost limb meant nothing if you lived. Sighing as she continued rubbing her wrist, she looked over at Naruto, who nodded in return and continued on for her. With her lost limb, she grabbed the key for it and opened the shackle as I pushed him in that direction. Latching it onto him, he was unable to use his fading technique anymore and I was able to kill him once and for all. After the battle and before returning here, we both used Nibi's and Kyuubi's chakra to reattach Yugi-chan's hand, but even still it doesn't work the way it is supposed to. Without even thinking, Tsunade was out of her chair and besides a rather frightened Yugito as she looked over the hand. She cast a diagnostic jutsu and was slightly surprised at what she saw before shaking her head lightly. I see. I will have to research and see if there is a way to completely heal it. The only reason it is still alive is that blood is still flowing through it through some pretty bad veins. Sighing to herself as she turned to Naruto, Naruto was in a state of shock as she wrapped him into a hug, his head dug into her cleavage before she started shaking him violently. And goddamn you knucklehead. You should have sent a message to me. We would have sent help. And don't even use the excuse you were in hiding. The damn Uchiha could have found a way to get it to us. Seeing that Naruto was turning into mush in her hands, she stopped shaking him as he slowly stumbled around in the room before walking into the wall and falling flat on his face. Tsunade snickered lightly as Naruto shook his head as he slowly stood up before walking to Koharu and pulling out a scroll and handing it to her. Sensei said to give that to you, ma'am. He said you would want to read what is in there. Koharu could only smile lightly at the boy as a tear threatened to fall from her eye. Holding it back as she wiped it away, she slowly took the scroll from him as she nodded shakily. While she was happy that the boy was taking everything so well, she was fighting back her emotions. She knew it was hurting him as well, but his years of pain had taught him how to deal with it, but it was nothing could deal with losing your own son. Diligently opening the scroll, using her years of dealing with paperwork, she quickly read through it before dropping it in shock. Her eyes watered and tears were dripping from the corners before she instantly hugged the boy in front of her, much to the surprise of all in the room as she whispered words that were not heard by anyone other than a certain blonde cat, who looked strangely yet knowingly at the two. As everyone recovered as the two separated, Koharu wiped her tears away before a stern look crossed her face as she marched up to a sweating Hokage, having a slight idea of what this was about. Tsunade, why did you never tell me that you and my son had a child? Not only that, why did any of you fail to mention to me that he had my great-grandson and was allowed to go through all the shit he had to go through? Tsunade flinched at the volume of her voice and was quickly beginning on finding an escape. Why did she have to be the one stuck with this and not the damn pervert probably laughing at her in his grave? If he was going to die a second time when she made it to the afterlife. Actually, she was going to kill him anyways, so that just gave her more reason to. We didn't want anyone to know who Minato belonged to. If anyone at the time had known that he was our child, the best in the land would have been sent to kill him. We did the only thing we could do and put him in the orphanage with Sarutobi's help. Naruto was for much of the same reasons, except with Kyuubi there was the risk of awakening Kyuubi too early and other villages seeking to capture him and use the fox's power against us. If he had been awakened before he was 12. Her Ba-chan. Kyuubi is a she. Naruto interjected as a loud ringing sound sounded through his mind while he held his ears tightly. She is wanting me to tell you this because she is not a goddamn guy and is tired of everyone thinking she is. Damn right I am. The said fox interjected as well as she ran around in her cage, pissed at being called a guy again. In a cage not too far away, a two-tailed cat rolled his eyes while mumbling about a hot-headed wife. Everyone in the room twitched, but seeing that Naruto was holding his ears in pain as his eyes were becoming dazed, they decided not to do anything as the fox was currently throwing a temper tantrum. Shaking her head, Kaharu quickly turned back at Tsunade with narrowed eyes. I know what would have happened, Tsunade. I'm not as senile as Sarutobi was, and I know a small amount of the blame goes on him when it comes to Naruto. But I would have liked to have known about Minato. Hell, if I knew everything I did now back then, I wouldn't have interfered, seeing how well he grew up. The same with Naruto, but I would have liked to help with everything. Not be kept in the dark. Tsunade winced at the tone of her voice. She had a point, but she, Jiraiya and Sarutobi had kept a promise not to tell anyone in fear of the information leaking and getting to people that would have spread it around. I know, but I am sorry. It was for the best. In Naruto's case, I'm still pissed at the lack of what Sensei had done. If I was here, I would have guaranteed that Naruto would have been well looked after, but I was never here. After all, it does take a lot out of you losing a son and an entire family. Tsunade at the end looked Kaharu in the eyes. Surprisingly enough, Kaharu backed off as she knew exactly what Tsunade was hinting at. Naruto, on the other hand, had narrowed his eyes hearing this and didn't waste a second as he walked straight to Tsunade with his eyes blazing and spoke in an angry yet powerful voice. What do you mean lost an entire family? I'm still here, you old hag. Out of all the people my father and the Sandaime would tell, you would be on the top of the list that I was your grandson. Both Sakura and Shizune gasped in surprise at what Naruto had said and the volume of his voice, while Homura narrowed his eyes and quickly left the room to inform the council what he had learned. They would need to hear this. This didn't go unnoticed by Kaharu, but she stayed behind wanting to hear the rest of what happened. To their surprise, Tsunade looked Naruto in the eyes, having to look up a little as he was a few inches taller, and spoke in a quiet, yet equally powerful voice. I never knew, Naruto. I was left in the dark about your existence. If I had known in the slightest that you were indeed my grandson, do you honestly think you would have grown up in Konoha seeing what your life was like? Naruto shrunk back at her words at the end, realizing his mistake. He would have thought that one or the other would have told her, but apparently neither did, which was the reason why Tsunade was lashing out on him. Answering her question, he shook his head, allowing Tsunade to continue. You're right, I wouldn't have. I would have taken you with me and probably never returned to this village, as it was you that brought me back. I was told the night when you found us, when I was told that you existed. Jiraiya was out cold for the rest of the night and the next day, and that was why he wasn't helping you those 2 nights. Now, do I make myself clear? He could only nod, as the killing intent she was radiating was far stronger than he had anticipated. But in an instant, it all went away as he was wrapped up into a tight hug by the Gondime, who had a tear rolling from her eye as old memories resurfaced. Knowing that the rest of the day was pretty much screwed, seeing that Homura was gone, she let him go before turning to Shizune. Shizune, I need you to look up the records that medics attempted to reattach a severed limb. Sakura, retrieve Asuma's, Kurenai's and Guy's team and tell them to meet in this office at 5 sharp. Also, tell Kakashi to come as well and not to be late, otherwise there will be a swift and brutal punishment. Naruto, you and your fiancé are to come with us to the council chambers. With a quick yes, both Sakura and Shizune left the room. Yugito, on the other hand, shrunk back at this, as council meetings were never good things when she was back home and only led to her misery. Sensing this, Kaharu was actually the first to her side to reassure her, and Naruto, seeing that he didn't like the council as well as he was Sarutobi's ward. Don't worry, child. Nothing bad will happen. Yugito still wasn't convinced, but with Naruto wrapping his hand around her waist, she felt a little more comfortable and nodded as Tsunade led the way. Leaning against him and laying her head on his shoulder, she whispered lightly into his ear so no one else could hear her. Naruto, I don't like this. Other villages don't accept new canons very often unless they have something of worth to them. And I know the Hyuga have at least one seat here, and I know the cloud is very sore about the incident back then, and the feeling is probably mutual. And you worry too much, love. Naruto interrupted her, which in turn gained her full attention as she looked up at him. Shaking his head as he held her closer to him, he smiled as he kissed her on the nose before whispering back to her in a caring tone. 1. Konoha has the highest acceptance rating of other villages, as we are a little more lenient on those that come here. 2. While they don't have much to gain, they do stand to lose a lot. Mainly me and what I know. 3. Sure, the Hyuga have a seat, but they only hold one. There are, I believe, 14 other seats, including the Hokage and elders. And finally, well, there are some still sore about what happened between Kumo and the Hyuga. One of my friends lost his father because of it, so he has the right to be bitter about it. But, even if that sways some of their votes, there's still over many other members to win over. After he finished, Yugito smiled lightly as she closed her eyes and allowed him to guide her. He was always willing to do whatever was best for her first, and if he had confidence things would go their way, she would too. Getting a small shake from him, she opened her eyes as they reached the door. Slipping out of his grasp, she followed Naruto and Tsunade, and as Koharu walked over to her seat, Homura, who was standing in front of the council, quickly sat beside her as the rest of the council looked at the Gondime Hokage, only to see her glaring straight at the old man and cracked her knuckles in a dangerous manner. So, what did the late Homura tell all of you? As Homura paled, knowing what Tsunade could do to him, the rest of the council looked on. The first to speak was an older version of Shikamaru, except with a scar over his right eye and a tanner skin, who seemed to be grinning as he noticed the look the Hokage was giving the old man. He hadn't gotten too far, Tsunade-sama. I almost stopped listening to him after he kept disrespecting the Yondaime's will and the Sandame's law by saying Naruto was back. I believe he was trying to paint it in a bad picture like a lot of the villagers do, but you came just in time. Tsunade smirked as she looked over at Shikaku and nodded at him. Secretly, she was planning on giving the man a raise, as he had just earned it in her mind. Thank you, Shikaku. Seeing that he didn't get too far into the details, I will explain what has happened. As you all can see, Naruto has indeed returned, but without Jiraiya. The reason being, that he is dead. The silence in the room was deafening to all those that heard it as tear escaped Koharu's left eye. Looking at each and every member of the council, Tsunade was counting on who all would agree when it came time to vote and liked her odds, so she continued. Jiraiya died in the Cloud Country after the Raikage sent a group to kill him and Naruto. Now, the two of them being there the weeks beforehand, they were warned of the attack by the girl standing besides Naruto. But even then, one of them was far too powerful for Jiraiya to handle, and he met his end at his hands. In retaliation, Naruto used a jutsu that only one person before has ever used to slay Jiraiya's killer. The Hiraishin. Hearing everyone besides those who knew gasp and paled, Tsunade smirked as she looked over at the young boy before turning her vision back upon the council. Another council member made his presence known as he looked over at Naruto before speaking in a nonchalant tone. Tsunade, it is customary for the shinobi returning to tell us. Not when it has already been explained to me personally and when the events have drastically changed one's outlook of life, Ryo. Tsunade answered with her eyes glaring daggers at the man before looking at the rest of the council, daring any of them to challenge her. Seeing that none were going to do so, she continued. As I was saying, following Jiraiya's last words, Naruto was returning to the village with the informant of the attack, Miss Ni here, when the Akatsuki ambushed them, one being Uchiha Itachi. This time around, Naruto defeated them, killing the other member while sparing the rogue Uchiha, as he had one last mission, given to him by our own elders, it appears. Once again both Koharu's and Homura's eyes widened, but this time along with the one-armed man known as Danzo. Tsunade narrowed her eyes at this, knowing all three to be the ones that called the shot, as Sarutobi would never do something so drastic, but had a slight suspicion as to why. I will want to talk to you three about that later. To continue, Itachi took both into hiding before contacting the only other person he could trust. A woman from within the Akatsuki, and if I heard the name correctly, a former orphan, student of Jiraiya's. Having no choice as their options were limited, we attacked the Akatsuki's headquarters head-on after both Itachi and Konan snuck us in. Naruto interrupted Tsunade, which earned him a stern glare from the Hokage, but he seemingly ignored as he continued on. The fight against the majority of the members was quick as it was almost an ambush, and with our combined strengths they fell quickly. After both Yugito and I took out what we believed to be all the Akatsuki, the true leader showed up. A man that grew up and battled with the Shadaime Hokage on many occasions and won half of their bouts except for the most important one of all. The battle at the Valley of the End. Uchiha Madara was alive until that day and was the reason Kyuubi attacked us 15 years ago. All in the council members were chilled to the bone to hear this. Even the ones that truly believed Naruto Kyuubi and thought that he was making this up. But even then, it was brought to their attention not but this last year of what the Sharingan could truly do, and knew the story had some credit to it. But to think that Madara survived all this time was bordering ludicrous, and the only person on the council that truly looked like most of this didn't affect him spoke with his pupil-less lavender eyes looking straight at Naruto. Boy, do you know how ridiculous that is? No one his age could live for that long and still be combat-worthy. It is physically impossible, as both Homura and Kaharu can attest to that, and even the late Sandame's skills were diminished compared to what they once were. Not being fazed at the Hyuga's comments as a lot of the shinobi in the room nodded as it was a little far-fetched, Naruto looked straight into Hiyashi's eyes as he answered. Believe me, all of you. The Sharingan has far more power than ever thought imaginable. There are stages not even recorded in their black book beneath the head house's basement. You have the 3 regular stages, then the Mangekyu, which is the level Itachi had reached, which you all probably know requires either killing your best friend or killing another Mangekyu user, as he explained to me. But Madara reached a level by doing something more drastic. You see, back when the clans were all fighting amongst each other before the villages were created, both the Senju and the Uchiha clans rivaled each other and were constantly fighting with each other. The major turning point was when 2 young brothers of the Uchiha clan both activated the Mangekyu, one being Madara. Before then, the Uchihas were fading slowly as the Senju were becoming more powerful, but with them they conquered almost every other clan. But because of his constant use of the Mangekyu, Madara was slowly becoming blind. He had tried everything but nothing seemed to work. In a desperate move to regain his sight, he took his brother's eyes and implanted them into him. When he did that, power like nothing else flooded his body, giving him 3 jutsu beyond almost anything this world has seen. The first and most dangerous of the 3 was the ability to affect the space-time continuum, much like that of my father's Hiraishin, except it wasn't nearly as fast but could travel to almost anywhere he had ever been. And he had such control over the technique that he could bend the time it took to work and could phase to the same exact spot to make it seem that he turned into a ghost. He used it to make it almost impossible for him to be even touched, even when I used the Hiraishin against him. The next ability wasn't as bothersome, but was far more useful, as it controlled a being with far more power than anyone could hope to reach. Kyuubi no Kitsune. While the Mangekyu could tame it, it wasn't able to control it, so its usefulness was minimal at best. And finally, his last technique was instant regeneration. The ability to regenerate from any wound in an instant. Even if he was fatally wounded, he could recover from it unless the wound was instant death. That is where his phasing technique came in handy. It made it where it was almost physically impossible to land an instant death blow on him. The only downfall was that he could never age from the technique, as it halted his cells aging as it was constantly regenerating them, making them younger and younger. In truth, Madara would have eventually died due to reverse aging, as he was my age if not a little older. The only reason I know this much is that Madara himself told me during his battle, as he was quite sure he was going to win. Naruto finished his explanation as he had looked every member of the council in the eye, including Tsunade. Each of them were gapping at what Naruto had said. None could believe the Sharingan could have such power, and each made plans in their minds either to retrieve Sasuke or to eliminate the threat of having to deal with such great power again, as such a threat could bring down Konoha. Sensing this, Naruto quickly put a stop to it. Speaking in an almost emotionless voice, he began sending chakra to his eyes as he spoke slowly to add on to the effect. There is no need to worry of Sasuke acquiring such power and becoming a substantial threat to the village. Itachi asked me before the battle to remove his eyes if he did not make it. I had lost an eye in the battle and my other was badly damaged from my last attack. And both were transplanted into me. In an instant that horrified almost every person in the room as his dark blue eyes turned red and 3 spinning tomo swirled around the pupil before fading back into their original color. As everyone was too shocked to say anything as Naruto had Itachi's Sharingan, Yugito stepped forward next to Naruto. While she seemed to be uneasy and anxious, she continued for him as he inched closer to her. What Naruto didn't mention was that in the battle against Madara both Itachi and Konan had fallen to Madara in 3 attacks and had trapped me to extract my demon with a chakra diffusioning cuff. I severed my own hand to free myself from it before unlocking it and on mere chance caught Madara's wrist with it, keeping him from using any of his abilities. After Naruto destroyed him with his double-edged technique, I removed Itachi's eyes, seeing what happened to Naruto, and implanted them into his and let Kyuubi handle the attaching them as I have no medical abilities. Naruto nodded at her as he closed his eyes before opening them as he finished the rest of the story, but kept a firm eye on Yugito as he noticed her anxiousness. As soon as the fox had finished with the healing, we burned all the bodies including the heads as we wanted nothing to do with it or their bounties. We attempted to reattach her hand and temporarily succeed, but knew that a true medic would have to take a look at it. Knowing that Tsunade was here and that I was late, we headed here hoping for at the minimum of her restoring her wrist. But head this here and now, whatever you decision of her status is, I will not let you harm my fiancé even if it means I have to kill every single person here. And if she is not to stay here, I will leave with her, taking all the knowledge I know along with the Hiraishin. At the end his eyes had reactivated and had morphed into the Mangekyo as he looked at every single person in the room in the eyes besides the girl he was defending. While a good few were impressed that Naruto would go so far to protect the girl, even though they were still trying to absorb everything the two had just said along with the Hokage, the rest narrowed their eyes at the blonde. The first to speak for them was the creator of Roots as he looked at Naruto with his one visible eye. Is that a threat, boy? You better believe it is. I don't bluff when those I care about are in any danger. Naruto answered in a low whisper but was still heard by everyone as if he had been speaking regularly. And the tone of his voice promised swift and quick reaction as the tri-bladed pupils began to swirl. Danzo narrowed his eyes as he motioned for a few of the Anbu corners to be on guard when all 3 walked up and stood besides the Hokage. The one in a fish-like mask whispered into Tsunade's ear and her face turned deadly serious as her vision locked on Danzo. Thank you, Dolphin. I will have a chat with him later. The said bandaged man paled as the 3 Anbu stood where they were, all 3 wearing the cream-colored cloaks signifying they were captains. Recognizing the voice of the dolphin-masked Anbu, Naruto kept his mouth shut as he tried to figure out what had driven him to become an Anbu and to become a captain so quickly. Tsunade shook her head as she looked at Naruto, still surprised at the fact that he now had the Sharingan and Mangekyo. At that, she turned his vision back to the council quickly. Now everything has been said and the stakes and consequences have been placed. I would like to have a vote on allowing young Miss Ni here become a shinobi of Konoha. Will all those that are for her instatement, please stand. Those who are not stay seated. Out of the 14 that were seated as Tsunade counted as the 15th, 8 stood up, leaving only Danzo, Hiyashi, Homura, Ryo and 2 other council members seated. The ones that were standing not counting Tsunade were Shuza, Inoichi, Kaharu, Shibi, Shukuku, Sume and a woman with pink hair that reminded him a lot of Sakura. Seeing that all had casted their votes, a small smirk graced Tsunade's lips as her vote kept it from being a split decision, spoke with a little joy in her voice. Then it is decided on a 9-6 vote that Ni Yugito is to become a full-time chunin of Konoha after the standard year probation. Now you may be seated as I have another decision to inform you of. As all that sat down, Tsunade's smirk could be seen a mile away as she gave Naruto a quick look. I have decided that Naruto is to go by his real name of Namikaze Naruto and is promoted to the rank of Junin due to his feats. While a little less than a third of the council members looked displeased at this, the rest were either non-caring or slightly appeased hearing this before she continued with her sly smirk still on her face. After much talk with many of you in this room along with some of the more respect shinobi of our village, I have decided on a successor. I have 2 possible candidates Rokudaime Hokage, but as it is tradition I have to name 2 possible successors. The first and my personal choice, my grandson Namikaze Naruto. And shut up or I'll have you executed. She finished at the end as 5 council members that voted against Yugito attempted to say something. The only one that did not argue was Hiyashi as he had no quarrels with Naruto taking the job. Seeing that she was grateful that he hadn't, she took another deep breath as the 5 were saying nothing due to the killing intent that had radiated off the Hokage only seconds ago. Once she was in control of her emotions, she returned closer to normal as she continued. As I is saying, Naruto is my first and more likely successor. But as there is always 2 that are considered just as I was with Jiraiya, Minato with Orochimaru, Sarutobi with Danzo and my grand uncles with Madara, Naruto has his rival. I have named Nara Shikamaru as the second possible successor. Seeing that no one was complaining about her second choice, she sighed lightly before finishing up. Alright then, you all are dismissed. Elders, I would like to see you tomorrow morning at 9 sharp. If not, well let's just say Ibiki will be having a load of fun. All 3 of them paled knowing what she was going to be asking them as Itachi's mission had been brought to light. They all disappeared quickly except for the dolphin-masked Anbu that Naruto turned to with a smile on his face, but keeping a good look on the younger blonde female as her mood seemed to slowly changing. This was bothering him and he knew something was going to happen, but he didn't want the others to overreact so he continued to act normally. Hey Iruka-sensei, when did you get into Anbu and how did you become a captain so quickly? The said dolphin-masked Anbu shook his head at Naruto as he smiled underneath his mask. Sorry Naruto, I'll have to explain it to you later when I'm not on duty. I have. Iruka, you have the rest of the day off. Tsunade spoke as she looked at Iruka and Naruto with a devious smile. Iruka's face faulted as he could tell she did that on purpose but she shook her head as she continued. But he will have to tell you later Naruto. All of us are heading back to my office as it is almost 5 and you 2 are going to have to be a part of this meeting. I'm very sure it involves you 2 and your plans. Both Naruto's and Yugito's blood stopped hearing this and they began to contemplate on fleeing the village with Hiraishin as they had not planned on anything beyond being together. But neither got the underlying meaning of her words which in turn got Tsunade's attention as it was if they did not know. She narrowed her eyes as she planned to ask them about that after the meeting instead of bringing it up during as she was going to announce a baby shower. Quickly shaking her head, she placed her hands on their shoulders and in 2 swirls of leaves, the 4 were at the office with the room packed with everyone Sakura went to retrieve. Everyone's eyes widened seeing Naruto back along with the ex-Kumo shinobi but said nothing as Tsunade had put on a serious face once more as she pulled out a Junin vest and a Chunin vest with a Konoha Hitai 8 and handed them to Naruto and Yugito respectively. Once again everyone was thrown for a loop before Tsunade turned to all of them with the same serious look on her face. Do all of you know the status of Jiraiya? Seeing everyone nod solemnly at her words, she closed her eyes before continuing. We will hold a memorial for him tomorrow at noon for all of you that wish to attend. Now for lighter news and the reason I called all of you here. As you can see Naruto has returned and with a newly instated shinobi, Ni Yugito. Hinata, Neji. I know you might have some resentment for her seeing that she is an ex-Kumo shinobi, but I expect you to put your differences aside as she is one of us now. Hinata nodded quickly as she had no resentment against her as it happened long ago, but Neji reluctantly did so as he did lose his father to the said events. And as such, I expect all of you to treat her fairly and like one of us, especially seeing that her maiden name will shortly changing to Namikaze. Seeing everyone nod as if they were in her place they would want the same treatment, Tsunade smirked wickedly as she turned to both sweating teenagers, wanting to find an escape knowing what she was going to ask but sighed as she had other business to handle first. This now brings me to our next order of business. During the council meeting, I named 2 possible heirs to become the next Hokage. While normally it is kept low-key, the friends end up learning the truth, so it would be better to get it out now. I named both Nara Shikamaru and Naruto. The look of surprise was evident on everyone's face, none more so than Shikamaru, as he honestly did not want the job, as in his opinion it would just be too troublesome. Before he could even say as much, Tsunade cut him short as she glared at him intensely. Shikamaru, I have not chose you to let you allow Naruto to achieve his goal easily. As much as I hate to say it, only the 2 of you are the only qualified shinobi to become the Hokage. Shikamaru, excel in many areas that are needed to become the Hokage, but you lack the desire and the raw power to do such. Naruto, while I'm not sure on your full abilities as of now, you have just as much growth as he does to become Hokage. Both of you would make great Hokages. Shikamaru would be like that of my grand uncles, while Naruto would be another Sandaime and Yondaime. And as such, you 2 will begin your training for this immediately. Neither Naruto nor Shikamaru was arguing as she finished. Both knew what she said to be true and weren't going to dispute it, though Shikamaru still thought it was troublesome. Tsunade shook her head at the 2, seeing them both. She smirked once more as her eyes landed on Yugito. Now this brings me to our next and the final thing I called you all here for. As I said before, I want you to treat Yugito with respect, but there is more than it, being that she will become a shinobi to our village, as I would announce this to everyone. It is that during the time it took for both Naruto and her to arrive here that. Please do not tell a story that you know nothing of. Yugito answered in a violent hiss. It was obvious by her tone and her reaction that she did not want Tsunade speaking about their relationship and was going to be damned if she was going to allow it. Her chakra began pulsing in violent patterns as Naruto quickly stood in front of her in an attempt to calm her down. But before he could and anyone could react, she continued in her anger. My relationship with my betrothed is our business and our business alone. Do not make any plans for us that we aren't ready for, especially after the hell we had to go through to get here. Naruto and I will be together, but on our terms, no one else's. A thud was heard as Hinata hit the ground in shock, hearing what was said, while Naruto looked glum as he heard the thud. For those that knew her, none could say her reaction was surprising, as she had a hardcore crush on the blonde. While they knew something like this was likely, they said nothing, as it only would cause her more pain and could end up putting her over the edge. Both Kurenai and Neji were at her side, checking to make sure she was physically stable before sighing, as they knew that an emotional roller coaster was coming and that Naruto and Yugito were going to get dragged into this. But one other that cared for Hinata was going to do something. Kiba was growling a storm under his breath as he glared at Naruto. No matter what he had done to shift Hinata's attention away from the blonde and to him, it didn't work. He had resigned himself to having allowed Naruto to have Hinata, and this happens. Oh, he was going to make him pay for this. Hinata was the perfect girl in his opinion, and Naruto was throwing her away for this girl that smelled like cats. Walking towards Naruto, he pulled his fist back and smacked Naruto in the face. Just as he was about to continue his assault, an arm gripped his shoulder tightly and pulling him back and kept him from moving. It was his other teammate, Shino, who silently whispered to him. Kiba, stop. If you want to do this on your free time, go ahead. But now is not the time. Just know, 4 years can change someone, especially someone that did not know of the other's feelings towards him. As Kiba nodded reluctantly, Shino sighed in relief as a kunai slipped back into Yugito's pouch as she was ready to pounce if he made a move. even if Naruto was holding her back, seeing his aggression towards them. In fact, the punch didn't even seem like it fazed the blonde. This made Shino wonder how strong Naruto actually had become. Shaking his head as now was not the time for this, he spoke to both Naruto and Yugito. I'm sorry for my teammates' actions. It's just. Yeah, I know. Hinata had a crush on me. Naruto answered flatly as he put himself in front of Yugito, who still seemed ready to pounce Kiba, but with Tsunade gripping her shoulder it wasn't going to happen. In response, Kiba growled far louder than before as Akamaru was ready to pounce on the blonde, having a similar affection for the blue-haired Kunoichi. You knew about it and didn't do anything. All these years I've been trying to get her to see me and she only had eyes for you. And you don't even tell her that you had no interest in her, or at least try to hook her up with someone else. And then you go out and get hitched with this cat-smelling whore. I'm going to kill you, you dead last. Breaking free of Shino's grip, who was shocked to hear Naruto did know of her crush, Kiba shot past everyone before they could react and was on Naruto and looked him dead in the eye as he was wanted to see the life in his eyes leave him. Soon as he did this, he noticed something was wrong as Naruto's eyes were no longer blue. They were red with a tri-bladed shuriken for a pupil, and they were spinning madly as his left eye began to bleed in the corner. To add to the fear, he heard one word and knew what it was as Kurenai spent her free time trying to replicate it. Tsukiyomi. Kiba found himself strapped to a cross as the world around him bleed red with spots of black and gray. Everyone had disappeared except for Naruto, who was standing in front of him but looking far more menacing than before as his visual appearance had changed. While it wasn't drastic, he was far more feral looking than before and his voice was far deeper than before. Kiba, you are a fool. This only served to make him madder, but Naruto wasn't finished. I couldn't just tell her that. If I did, Hinata would have more than likely committed suicide. What? Kiba responded in shock as he heard this and didn't believe this completely. The Hinata he knew would never do something like that. But to add to his shock, another voice was heard and this one was female. He is right, Kiba. Hinata would have committed suicide at the time if it wasn't for him. Kurenai answered as she walked up to Naruto, looking around the area and whistling. So this is the legendary genjutsu of the Uchiha clan. I guess you caught me in this as well to show me this as well as to explain to Kiba what was going on. Seeing Naruto nod, she sighed before shaking her head as she turned back to her student. As I said, Kiba, she would have committed suicide if Naruto had come out and told her that he was interested. Seeing that he still didn't understand what she was talking about, Naruto sighed as he took over and stood in front of the tied-back Inazuku. It is simple, Kiba. Due to her father's treatment early in her life combined with the pressure of being the Hyuga heiress and being belittled by the said clan has left her unstable. The only reason I know this is that I used to see all three of the counselors in the village and Hinata began visiting them as well. As you know, Yoshino, Shikamaru's mother, is one of them, but the other two are rarely used unless it falls under two specific categories. Suicidal and the mentally unstable, and the other is rape victims. Yoshino is mostly used for the civilians and shinobi of our villages and can deal with those kinds of victims, but with her being almost completely overwhelmed by the amount she needed help. That's where I come in. Kurenai took over as she stood beside Naruto as she looked up at her student, slightly glad that she wasn't in the same predicament. I was trained to be one of the other two counselors and was trained specifically on how to deal with and help those who have been raped. The other counselor is Inoishi as he has the best insight on people's minds and how they work, therefore able to deal with the mentally unstable. Suicide was something all three of us were fit to deal with, just Inoishi and I dealt with it more to give Yoshino some rest. On rare occasions all three of us would have to counsel one patient. In fact that it is so rare that I can name the three people we have had to counsel, but due to confidential reasons the third will be unnamed. The other two however can be named as one is Hinata, Kiba. Why do you think I was assigned to your team? A rookie Junin is hardly ever allowed to take a team unless there is a lack of those who do not want to teach. Kiba could only shake as he did know that part, but was still having a hard time believing that what they were saying about Hinata was true. Sensing this, Kurenai could only shake her head as she continued. Believe it or not, Kiba, Hinata was one of the only 3 that have ever been counseled by us. While rape can bring insanity, I have a 100% success rate on preventing it, as I know all the signs and how to deal with them. But with Hinata, it was different. She was raped so young that she could not even digest what was happening to her, and with all the problems with her home life, it only festered and ate away at her. While she is not insane, she has shown very many times that she is suicidal and on multiple accounts had been caught in the act. Hiyashi was at a lose at what to do. While he wanted his daughter to be mentally fit, he also wanted her to be the perfect clan heiress. So he sent her to us as much as he could to help her as he worked on turning her into the clan heiress. In truth, that did more harm than good, but nonetheless we allowed it to happen. During our times with her, she began to see her suicidal tendencies began to lessen as she took interest into someone else that constantly being seen by the 3 of us. When we learned of this, we encouraged it and tried to see how the 2 would work together, but the results were dismal at best as the 2 were polar opposites. So, we came up with a plan that would keep her tendencies to a minimum while allowing her to believe that she truly could be with him. Seeing the look on Kiba's face as it began to dawn on him who she was talking about, Naruto sighed as he looked at the strapped-down boy. Yes, Kiba, I was the only other person that has been seen by all 3 of our villager counselors. The only difference is that I was mentally unstable along with being suicidal. If it wasn't for Inoichi-san, Kurenai-sensei and Yoshino Ka-san, I would not have even been allowed into the academy due to my unstable personality. You see, I have multiple personality disorder. While I only had 2, it was 2 vastly different personalities. One was the one everyone sees as it more of a happy-go-lucky person with a serious streak to protect those he cares about. But the others is a whole different story and is part of the reason I'm not acting like I used to. The other was a personality created to deal with all the shit I've been dealt with in my life. And with everything that had happened in my life, my other personality was subjected to it and shaped his hatred for all living things. The truth was it would have never been discovered until I snapped, until Kurenai-sensei here asked for Inoichi to check my mental status after I was raped on my 6th birthday. It was on that day I first met Hinata and they tried to see if we could help each other. In the end it didn't work, but that's when Hinata's feelings for me intensified and she began to become possessive of me. Naruto at the end could only sigh as he looked over at Kurenai so she would continue for him. Catching his eyes, Kurenai quickly did so as she could see he did not like having to talk about this. That was becoming a problem as she was bringing out Naruto's second personality, and with his temper and being prone to violence we had to separate the 2 and wipe Hinata's memories. But even still, we couldn't wipe the feeling she felt for him. That is why she stalked Naruto at times even though she didn't know why she was doing it. She crushed after Naruto as she subconsciously believed that he was what she was to be and therefore the one for her. So when she began to do this and Naruto began to report that she did, we told him not to as he was still having a positive effect on her. When I said when the 2 worked together was dismal, I meant for Naruto as Hinata was improving with him around. While I cannot state why it was, let us just say it was not pretty. As she finished, Kiba began ingesting everything he was told slowly. While he still didn't believe some of what he was told, he was beginning to understand as Kurenai was there. The only reason he did know she was there was that her scent was the same, which was odd as genjutsus rarely were so powerful that they could fool the sense of smell. As he slowly came to accept what they told him, though still not believing a small portion, he closed his eyes before turning to Naruto. Naruto, I'm sorry. While I still don't believe all this, if it is true it does explain a lot. But I will have to speak with Hinata to make sure first. Naruto nodded as Kurenai looked ready to be released from the genjutsu when Kiba screamed in pain as a sword pierced through the cross. It pierced into his stomach and into his rib cage before twisting violently, earning another scream from him as Kurenai attempted to put a hand in front of her mouth only to find herself unable to move. Naruto looked at the Inazuku pitilessly as the sword was viciously ripped out of him as another Naruto from behind him pulled it out before disappearing. That, Kiba, was for calling my fiancée a whore. Do so again and I will put you through the entirety of this jutsu and show you what it can truly do. And with that the genjutsu was released. Kiba hit the floor on all fours as he choked violently and attempted to gasp for air before vomit gushed from his mouth. Soon as it passed, Kiba began to catch his breath as Kurenai walked over to him, sweating a storm and panting lightly from witnessing what she did. Casting a sleeping genjutsu on him to help calm him down and recover, she looked over at Tsunade, who seemed to ready to throw both Kiba and Naruto into jail for what just happened. Tsunade-sama, I request Naruto to continue his counseling under Inoichi, Yoshino and myself. Tsunade's heart stopped hearing this, never knowing that Naruto had undergone counseling before and under the three of them. While she was away from the village, she did know that the three were the best counselors for shinobi around, and the fact that Naruto was seeing them meant that he was. She gritted her teeth at the thought and wished the old man was alive for allowing Naruto's life to get so out of control. Having very little control of herself, she was glad she didn't have to answer as Naruto did before. Only on one condition: I wish my fiancé to undergo counseling as well. From all three of you. The blood stopped as all the shinobi that knew of Kurenai's status as the rape recovery counselor, and that meant one thing and one thing only. They only glimpsed at Yugito as she caught them and glared back at them to stop their staring as her eyes focused in on Naruto, not liking the idea of being seen by a counselor. Before she could say anything to him though, Naruto beat her to the punch as he turned to her before hugging her tightly and bringing his mouth to her ear and whispering so no one else could hear. Do not fight this. We both need counseling for what we have just gone through. Not only that, but they can help you recover from what they did to you, babe. Everything I've done to help you has been based on what they did for me, so please don't fight this. I want both you and me to get better. Yugito's heart pulsed a few times as he hugged her tighter to him as she didn't answer. She did believe that Naruto would do whatever was best for her before himself, but having never been seen by a counselor before, she had no idea on what to expect. But hearing that Naruto had gone through it before meeting her convinced her that it could help her, and with him saying he was using what they taught him was more reassuring. Taking a deep breath as she regained control of her emotions as she melted into his touch and nodded. Okay, I will. Naruto smiled at the blonde girl in his grasp as she listened to him. While he loved her as she was, he was quite worried that if she didn't talk about what she had gone through to someone that understood and could help, that she would completely lose herself. He did understand what she went through, but not being completely over everything in his life couldn't help very much. Looking over at Kiba, he sighed lightly before looking over at Tsunade's general direction. He will wake up in about 20 minutes. I didn't use Tsukiyomi to torture him, only to inform him of confidential information and to teach him never to insult my fiancé. While many paled at what he said and mentally made a note not to piss Naruto off from now on, Tsunade raised her eyebrow hearing this before nodding, as one thing she wasn't allowed to know was personal information unless the said person was either a danger to her or the village. She was also quite glad that he didn't use the full power of the jutsu he had used, but something had her worried as Naruto wasn't looking directly at her. Naruto, never use that jutsu on anyone from this village again, do you understand me? I will let this one go as Kiba instigated the event, but I believe going through that jutsu once is enough punishment even if it wasn't used the way it was meant for. Kurenai, as for your request, I will grant it, but I order all three of you to counsel Yugito as well. But in both of their cases, I want to get reports on their status. Kurenai nodded lightly as she kept an eye on Naruto the entire time, knowing something was up and wanted to get to the bottom of it. She wasn't the only one, but Tsunade was going to wait until the reports on his status to find out. But there was something that was bothering her far more as she finally noticed the blood leaking from Naruto's eye. She flinched at the sight before her eyes narrowed at him as he still wasn't looking directly at her. Naruto, why aren't you looking at me and why is your eye bleeding? Naruto sighed lightly as he closed his eyes, not really wanting to answer her question but getting it from Yugito, who he could feel was giving him the look to tell her. Sighing a bit deeper, he continued looking in Tsunade's directions as he shifted his eyes back to their normal color only for them to be a very dull blue. For the bleeding it is quite simple, there is a price of using such powerful jutsu. In the case of Tsukiyomi I get a temporary but severe headache and at times lose blood from my eyes. Amaterasu is quite the same except I always bleed and the headache isn't as severe. And to answer you other question, it was because the eyes I gained from Itachi were practically blind. All three medics shocked hearing this as everyone else in the room remained silent, not sure what was going on or how Naruto got Itachi's eyes. The three medics knew there was one thing they could not cure and that was blindness. While it could be stalled, the person would sooner or later go blind. Sensing that all three were like this, Naruto quickly continued. I am only blind for a few hours after using one of the jutsu and is why I don't try to use it very often. Soon as they were implanted and attached, Kyuubi began working on recovering their eyesight so I could see, but it has been a long and difficult task. He ignored the few gasps of those who didn't know of Kyuubi, but at the moment he didn't care as he continued speaking. She right now is pissed at me for using it as it set her back another month to completely heal them. If I refrained from using Amaterasu and Tsukiyomi again until they are completely healed it will take 3 months. Looking back at the rest of the group, he sighed deeply. And for all of you that didn't know until just now, I do hold the Kyuubi no Kitsune prisoner in my gut. I really don't want to explain the details, so ask your senseis later or those that already knew. Now if this is all Ba-chan, I would like to go home and get some rest. I am tired. Catching the tone of his voice, Tsunade nodded at him before turning to Sakura and motioning her over. Alright Naruto, you and Yugito can leave. Sakura will take you to your apartment as you can't see at the moment and I doubt Yugito knows where it is. I will try to have it set up so that you can move into your father's estate by the end of the week but no promises. It hasn't been looked over for years now so I'll have to send cleaning crews to fix it up. Until then you two will have to make do with the apartment. Other than that, I will have you both reporting for counseling at 2 in the afternoon every day. Everyone else is to stay here as there is still a little more business to attend to. Nodding lightly, Sakura led both Naruto and Yugito out of the room, Yugito leading Naruto by her holding his hand. Once they left the room, Tsunade looked at all the shinobi she called into the room before shaking her head at some of the stunned looks some of them had on their faces. Getting annoyed by it, she decided to start answering unasked questions. Yes, as some of you didn't know Naruto does indeed hold Kyuubi. But that shouldn't affect your view of him as you've known him all this time. If you want to know more ask your senseis as Naruto doesn't want to explain and neither do I. And with him being open about carrying the fox I will slowly lift the ban about talking about the fox, but only those in this room will be allowed to do so. And for those of you that didn't figure it out, Naruto is the son of the Yondaime Hokage, who is both the damn deceased pervert and my son. As for his mother, he will have to tell you about that one as I really didn't even know who he was married to. And on a final note, I would some assistance when the two finally decide to get hitched. I can cover the fiancés, but I want each of you to chip in and help with the preparations. All of you are his friends and should have no problem in doing this as I've already done my part. Now, you may leave but I implore you to give Naruto and Yugito some time before approaching them about what happened when they were gone. Tsunade said solemnly at the end as her eyes began to water up, even if she was doing her best not to show any emotions. Each nodded seeing the Hokage holding herself back with all her strength and quickly left. As soon as they did only leaving Shizune, Tsunade burst and began sobbing heavily onto her desk. Shizune didn't waste any time as she was at her master's side and started to try and calm her down. While she was depressed as well hearing about Jiraiya's death, she knew Tsunade was hurting far worse as the two were close even if they didn't show it most of the time. Outside on their way to Naruto's apartment, Sakura was leading the way. But her curiosity was getting the best of her as she continued looking back at Naruto and Yugito. She knew better than to ask in front of Naruto as most guys didn't like to be caught up in girl talk, but she made plans to get Yugito by herself and ask her a few questions that she would more than likely not answer with him around. Seeing that they were almost at this apartment, she pulled out the keys he left her and unlocked the door as they reached the apartment. I did as you asked, Naruto, and watered and checked up on the plants. Also, Ino and I cleaned up to make your place look neat and not like a dump. Naruto blushed at the last part while making a mental note to get Sakura back at her for that as he was with Yugito. Yugito on the other hand shrugged as if she expected it as they walked in and was quite surprised to see the floor sparkling and furniture completely clean. She made a mental note to ask for Sakura and this Ino to be the one sent to clean out the Yondaime's place as she could get used to having such a clean room. Taking her sandals off at the doorway just as Naruto and Sakura did, she noted that Naruto was heading in the back unsupervised and was about to go after him when he turned back to her. Don't worry, Tenchi. As long as I'm here I can walk in here without seeing fine. Besides, I'm going to be in the back resting and it seems Sakura wants to ask you a few questions and I know you have a few of your own. She stopped hearing this and nodded lightly as he walked into the back room before turning towards the pink-haired girl. Soon as the door clicked shut in his room and knowing he couldn't hear her, she looked over Sakura who seemed to be nervous as it seemed she was measuring her up, which in truth was true. So you are the Sakura he talks about. Sakura perked up hearing this and was wondering what Naruto had said about her when Yugito continued in a deadpan voice. You're not as pretty as he made you out to be. Sakura couldn't help but face fault at this and began grumbling about blondes that she was going to beat the crap out of later. Catching this, Yugito smiled a little as she began to start liking the girl herself, but she had to make something clear and she would do this with her and Hinata if need be. I'm not so naive to say I'm any better looking than you, but I will say this here and now. If you do anything to try to split me and Naruto apart, I will leave you without being able to have children. Do you get me? I know that Naruto crushed over you a few years back and I respect if you want to be a part of his life as a friend, but he is my future husband and I'm not letting him get away. At the end she growled out in an intimidating fashion as she repressed her killing intent. The pink-haired shinobi was shocked at the sheer ferocity in her voice and could understand why she was acting the way she was. Naruto was a diamond in the rough as she looked back on it. He would do anything for those he loved and didn't want anything back for it. He cared for more than a lot of people could and tried to help those around him no matter what. Nodding lightly as she knew now that her blonde-haired teammate was taken, she spoke in a soft voice. I wouldn't dream of it. While I do care for Naruto, he is my teammate and friend and I want him to be happy just as he would want me to be happy. Soon as she said that, Yugito looked somewhat pleased before she took a deep breath to calm herself down. Once she did, she looked Sakura with a mild expression showing not much other than a little content. That's all I wanted to hear. Now what do you want to ask me? I am tired as well and need to rest like my fiancé. Catching Yugito's drift, Sakura nodded as she didn't want to impose. It can wait for another time. Both of you are tired and need to rest. Nodding lightly, Yugito smiled lightly as Sakura walked over to the door and put her sandals back on. Well, it was nice meeting you, Yugito, and I'll talk to both of you later. Oh, and tell Naruto that I would like to talk to him later. Nodding again, she half-heartedly waved goodbye as Sakura exited the apartment and shook her head as she left. Taking another deep breath, she removed her cloak and threw it onto the couch to reveal her black and white wardrobe before slipping into the bathroom. Once she exited, she was wearing a black t-shirt that seemed to belong to Naruto and a pair of his old penguin boxers that fit her snugly. Shaking her head at his old choice of clothes, she walked into the bedroom to see Naruto seeming to look out of the window. Were you staying up just waiting for me? Naruto nodded lightly as he turned in her general area as he was still unable to see very much but he could now see blurry objects. Yes, I was. I guess I've grown accustomed to sleeping with you that reverting back to the way it was before is a little difficult. Besides, you two didn't take that long as I knew she wouldn't ask them after you gave her your message. Yugito flinched at this part, but Naruto shook his head and continued. While I don't like you threatening my friends, I do know why. But please refrain from doing so to Hinata, she has another trouble to deal with and doesn't need that added to it. I will deal with her when the time comes. Yugito nodded lightly as he picked up the covers and motioned her over. Smiling lightly, she slid underneath them and melded into his left side and wrapped her arms around his chest as he wrapped his arm around her waist while the sheets fell on top of them. She smiled lightly as he kissed her gently on the nose before lowering his aim and kissing her deeply on the lips. She refrained from moaning into the kiss before breaking it off as she leaned her head up against his chin. I'll do my best not to. But if she starts something, I will not hesitate to defend myself. Nodding as he expected that much, he looked down at the blonde-haired girl in his grasp. That's all I can ask for. Now let's get some sleep. I don't know about you, but not sleeping last night to get her has left me exhausted. Hearing a yawn as her response, he could only shake his head while smiling as he closed his eyes while holding her tightly to him as he slowly let his exhaustion get the better of him. Yugito looked up at the man holding her and was still panicking. She knew deep down he would do nothing to harm her, but her instincts were overruling her train of thought as she struggled to break his grip and was trying her hardest to do so. She nearly succeeded, however he held firm and she screamed as loud as she could. The scream seemed to do more in her any of her attempts to break free of his grip as she successfully got free and attempted to leap out of the bed when the same arms quickly their way around her waist and pulled her back. She scratched at the bedding, trying to free herself when she felt two pulse of chakra flooding her system. Her body began to calm down as the chakra told her more than even her instincts could. Both were calm and soothing her and she stopped screaming as she regained control of her vocal cords. The first she could tell was her inner demon Nibi as she had done this with her in the past to calm her down. While she hadn't done it for this before, it was just something the Nekomata, cat demon, would do to soothe her nerves. However, the other chakra was puzzling her before she felt someone on top of her. Her instincts began to kick in once more before her reason shoved it out of the way, knowing who it was as she had identified the other chakra source. Curling herself up and into his grip, she closed her eyes before speaking softly after she took a few deep breaths as she could see their faces and didn't want to look at him, afraid she would see them. Naruto, don't leave me. I won't, Angel. Now take a few deep breaths and catch your breath back. He sighed in relief as she was beginning to listen to him. He was worried at first when she started to scream and he could feel a few chakra signatures heading towards them and he knew they were Anbu that scouted the city for intruders wanting to do a better job after allowing Sasuke to sneak out of the village unnoticed. Sighing as this was going to be a difficult morning, Naruto picked Yugito up and sat her onto his lap and placed his chin on top of her head, having a small idea of what was going on in her mind. He knew they would be there pretty quickly, but for now, he would take care of her. So you want to tell me what that was about? As she didn't answer, he sighed knowing that she wasn't going to tell him right away. She would eventually tell him, but it would take her a while as she was still in shock. Holding her closer, he sighed as he felt the signatures getting closer. Knowing that he was going to have to deal with them, Naruto created a few shadow clones. One he sent to do breakfast, another to stay with Yugito and his final one to clean up, having a feeling he was going to get a few visitors today outside of the Anbu heading their direction. He felt her wince when the clones appeared and sighed as he held her closer to him than before. He knew she was still recovering from what they had done to her and he knew she would never be the same person again. Normally she didn't panic like this, but every now and then it was to be expected. Nonetheless, he would help her step by step and stay at her side as he promised her that when he gave her the ring on her finger. Taking a deep breath, he placed his hand on her chin and gently lifted it up, making her look him in the eyes. Babe, I have something to deal with right quick. No. Yugito nearly screamed at him again as she tried to break free of his grip, forcing him to hold her tighter than before. Grunting as she elbowed him a few times, he held on before kissing her on the lips. He hated that her entire body froze as he did so, but it was the best way to get her attention on him. Pulling back with her looking straight at him, he slowly released his grip of her. Babe, we have a few Anbu heading here because of your screaming and I have to deal with them, otherwise shit will probably hit the fan. So please, it will only take a moment. No. She responded, cutting him off once more, but this time instead of trying to get away from him, she curled into him as if he was her last lifeline. Hearing her voice was softer and more subdued, he felt a little better as she was feeling better than when she woke up. As he held her close to him, he noticed that her skin was a little paler than unusual and her body temperature was slightly higher than before. He frowned, thinking that she was sick again before having remembered she had been like this in the morning the last week as they traveled to the village. This had him worried and he wanted Tsunade or Shizune to look her over as something was up. Feeling her squirm in his grip again, his senses caught an intruder into his house before he relaxed, knowing the presence very well. If it was him, he had no need to worry as he heard everything yesterday. Naruto, is everything here all right? Uruka's calm voice echoed from outside the door after a quick knock. Not getting an answer, the dolphin slowly opened the door to make sure they were decent before seeing the boy he considered his son holding desperately onto the blonde-haired girl he had only met the day before. He instantly knew what was wrong as he motioned for one of his subordinates and whispering to them. Go to Yuahi's house and tell her there is an emergency here at Uzu Namikaze's apartment. The rest of you return to your patrol. I'll stay here. While the Anbu at first titled his head at the name, he followed his order and disappeared with a swirl of leaves as the rest went on with their duty. As the Anbu disappeared, Uruka sighed as he took off his mask and slowly entered the room. Is there anything I can do? You've already called Kurenai, so just stay out of the room. Naruto answered as he tightened his embrace on his fellow blonde as she saw Uruka and began to tremble lightly as her eyes widened from the fear of what might happen. Uruka noticed that her grip onto him had increased and he noticed a small amount of blood leaking underneath. Flashback. It was a cold and bitter October night. Things could have been better for the newly appointed Chunin, but Uruka was still happier than he had been in years. He was finally a Chunin and now he was ready to take part of the harder missions and be exposed to new dangers. While this would deter most people, the dolphin was looking forward to it as he wanted to become an Anbu ever since he talked to the Hokage at the memorial stone. He was minding his business, heading to the house his parents owned before they perished. He normally would have taken the main roads, but he felt like taking the back roads as he was still too hyped about being promoted and wanted to release some of his pent-up energy. He noticed a few people in front of him running off into the distance, but he paid no heed to them as he figured they were trying to get home. As he neared where he saw them, a sound caught his ears and he was instantly alert. He wasn't sure what it was at first, but something told him it was not good. Getting ready for the worst, Uruka was ready to fight when he heard the sound again. Hell. The young Chunin's eyes widened as he realized the sound was a person. No, not a person. A young child, a boy it sounded like. Looking around, he saw nothing at first until his eyes caught a few trash cans and cardboard boxes collapsed over an almost indecipherable object. Seeing the slightest movement from the cans and boxes, Uruka didn't hesitate this time as he pushed them off. He felt sick at the sight of a young boy covered in tattered clothes, dirt clods and a small amount of blood and rank of a sickening smell. The next thing he knew, he was looking into the clearest pair of blue eyes he had ever seen. Uruka felt sicker at the sight as he could see the pain in the boy's eyes and didn't wait for a second as he reached down and picked up the young boy. The boy flinched and attempted to break free of his grip, but he was too weak to do so. No, don't hurt me. Feeling the boy panic, he wasn't sure what to do, so he acted on gut instinct. Don't worry, I won't hurt you. I'm going to take you to the hospital, okay? Once again, Iruka was looking into the boy's eyes before he saw the small head nod. Okay, Mr. Ninja. Iruka smiled softly at the boy as he jumped on top of the building and jumped roof to roof towards the hospital. He was unsure why someone would hurt such a seemingly nice boy. Flashback end. Sighing at the memory, he knew if it wasn't for the boy he would have probably became an Anbu earlier, but he had something much more now. He knew what it meant to be an older brother and a father, and that was a feeling he did not want to lose. He was taken aback when two sets of leaves swirled behind him as he saw Kurenai and his subordinate reappear, the former only wearing a loose yukata as she was probably sleeping only moments ago. In fact, he was sure she was, as he saw the deer mask of his partner had a few cracks indicating that she had slapped him, probably for barging in on her. Naruto's eyes quickly turned to Kurenai as she rushed into the room. If he could, he would have smiled, but he was just too tired to do so. Yugito also noticed the black-haired Kunoichi's entrance and clung tighter to him before. She didn't notice him flinch in her grasp as she kept her eyes firmly on the intruder, wanting nothing more than her to leave. Seeing the shape Naruto was in, Kurenai knew she had to defuse the situation they were in, as the girl was unintentionally harming Naruto in her panicked state. Looking over towards Naruto, she turned her attention back to girl. Yugito, you can let go of him. No one here is going to hurt you. All Kurenai received was a growl from Yugito as she tightened her already firm grip. Naruto bit his lip as her fingers dug into his waist while her legs added more pressure to his creaking spine. Closing his eyes for a moment, he spoke with his best voice to try and calm his lover down without letting her know she was hurting him. Babe, it's alright. She is only here to help. Yugito looked up at him for a moment before her eyes narrowed at him. She did not need help. She needed someone that understood what it was like, and it seemed that he truly didn't. Growling to herself, she pulled back her hands only for Naruto to embrace her into a firm hug as he placed his chin on top of her head once more. Yugito, please listen to me. She can help. She helped me, so I know she can help you. Kurenai said nothing as it seemed that Naruto had this in control and only watched until she was needed. Feeling the calmness of his voice and the warmth of his body, Yugito closed her eyes as she leaned into his embrace, her head onto his chest so she could listen to his heartbeat. After a few moments, he released his grip on her and she looked up at him softly before nodding as she reached her hand out to his face. Thank you. She stopped dead in her sentence as she noticed the blood on her fingers. Fearing the worst, Kurenai quickly and roughly separated Yugito from Naruto, knowing that she was going to start panicking again. Once she was in between them, she firmly gripped the blonde-haired girl, hooking her legs around her, and sat onto the bed. Naruto, go. If you stay, she'll only panic more. I'll take care of her now. While her words hurt, Naruto knew that Kurenai meant his appearance would rattle her more. He quickly left the room. He went straight to the couch, ignoring that it was being taken up by another occupant, and plopped onto the seat opposite of the dolphin. Don't you have a job to do? Ignoring the harsh tone, Iruka shook his head as the deer-masked Anbu rummaged through the cabinets before pulling out a packaged tea bags as Naruto's clone had placed a kettle to boil. Pulling out a few bags of tea and a few cups, the deer-masked Anbu removed his mask to reveal his rather blank face and lavender eyes. No, we were mostly here to be your guard. Sure, we're supposed to guard the sector, but Lady Tsunade won't dock our pay too much, if at all, for making sure you're alright. Naruto only grunted at the Hyuga as he figured he knew where his tea was due to his eyes. Having an idea hit him, he turned to Neji and was about to speak when the Hyuga quickly shot him down in a passive voice. No, even if I could, I will not spy on them to let you know what Kurenai is doing with your fiancé. She's put up a jutsu that blocks off any outside intrusion into your room. Refraining from snapping at the Hyuga, Naruto turned back and leaned onto the couch while keeping his focus on the wall in front of them. He really didn't care that his foster father was looking at him worriedly. All he cared about was what was happening in the room between his counselor and his fiancée. The gloomy look on the blonde's face was something that Iruka was not very used to. While he had seen him angry and annoyed, this was far beyond either. Taking the tea Neji handed him, he turned to the blonde before taking a sip. Naruto, you have to relax. Kurenai knows what she is doing. I'm not worried about that. Naruto simply answered as he kept his gaze straight ahead and leaning further back into the couch. Neji raised his eyebrow at this as he placed a cup of tea for the blonde on the coffee table before pulling up a stool and sitting right in front of him to keep him from ignoring them so easily. The Hyuga was very good at reading people and he knew the whole story from the minute muscle twitches he had caught so far. You're afraid something will happen to the girl. Naruto wanted to throttle the Hyuga for pinpointing his source of worry. Also, he was forcing him to either look at him, Iruka, or the wall between this room and his room. All he wanted to do was brood, but no, they couldn't give him that. Seeing the twitching in his arm and the glare he was being given, Neji knew he was on target. He was also irritating the blonde and he seemed very edgy and incentive at the moment and was ready to attack him. While this reminded him of Sasuke from what he remembered about the Raven, he shook that off before turning back to the blonde and nodding. You need not worry about her. She is in very capable hands. It's not that I'm worried about her. I'm just worried about what she can do. Naruto interrupted as he looked at the wall separating him between Yugito, hoping that everything was alright. This caught Iruka's attention. He knew how strong Kurenai was firsthand and to be honest he wouldn't want to get into a one-on-one fight against her. He also understood that the girl was a demon vessel like Naruto, but he was sure Kurenai had a few suppression seals if she was confident enough to seal off the room from outside contact. Still, the girl's strengths were unknown to virtually everyone but Naruto, so it very well could have been a bad idea for Kurenai to seal the room away from help. Don't worry about what could happen. Kurenai's skills are first class and she, even in the state she's in, would be prepared for the worst case scenario. I'm not worried about Nibi. I'm worried as she is currently the strongest shinobi in this village as I cannot use Hiraishin on her without fearing that I would cause injury and Tsunade is about the only one physical enough to wear her down outside of me. Naruto responded without hesitation, his eyes never leaving the wall as if he was piercing through it and seeing what was in within. Both Iruka and Neji's faces fell as they heard this. She was that strong. If that was the case, how in the world was Naruto restraining her when they got there? Unless she wasn't reacting violently as she had a small awareness of her surroundings and knew Naruto didn't mean her harm, even if her body was telling her otherwise. It stayed silent for a whole 10 minutes, outside of the occasional sips of tea by the three, before the door finally opened. The next moment music was blasting out of the room, making each of them hold their ears for a moment before adjusting to the sound. Naruto resisted the urge to run over towards the door when he saw Kurenai walk out, looking a little worn out but with a smile on her face. She's doing okay for now. Just make sure you two are on time for today's session. And make sure to bring your CDs like before. It seems both of you have that fix. Yeah, we had many long nights that music was our only escape. Naruto forced a chuckle before he bowed lightly to Kurenai. Not even waiting for a response, he quickly headed for the door before he actually began to chuckle. Lying on the bed, Yugito seemed to be dancing and rolling around to the music as it played. Shaking his head, Naruto quickly jumped onto the bed besides her. Mind if I join you, love? Yugito only purred in response as her smile widened seeing Naruto. She wasn't sure why, but music seemed to make her problems go away as she listened to the melodies. And his presence always calmed her even before this mess had begun. Hun, you know it. She finally verbally responded before nuzzling her face to his, which he seemed to do the same. While it seemed somewhat like a feral gesture, it probably was explained quite well due to the fact that they were both demon vessels and more in tune with their animal instincts. Smiling as she watched the two interact for a while longer, to see if Yugito would relapse, but glad to see she didn't, Kurenai yawned before looking over to see Iruka and Neji put their masks on. Iruka, seeing as you are Naruto's guardian, at least to the latest records, I will need to be seeing you soon for one of the sessions. Thanks for the heads up. I'll ask for time off so I'll be able to make it. Iruka responded before he disappeared in a plume of smoke with Neji, getting back to their patrols. Looking back in on the two, Kurenai had to repress a laugh as Naruto and Yugito both were now out of bed and dancing to the music, both being pretty horrid dancers. Shaking her head, she left in a plume of smoke to her houses, left the two to their own devices. She had to get dressed before reporting what had happened to the Hokage, then to Inoichi and Yoshino. Naruto, I really don't want to be here. Yugito quivered as she stood with her fiancé in Yoshina's office. She didn't like how white the room was and how still everything was. It seemed to be lifeless. Not liking it very much either, Naruto laid his arm over his shoulders before holding her closer to him. You promised you would, just as I did. And don't worry, the room they see us in is more lively than this. Will they separate us? Yugito asked as she didn't want to go through this if Naruto wasn't nearby. Sighing, Naruto nodded before he brought his lips to hers for a brief kiss. They will, but I'll be just outside. You have my kunai, so if you start to panic, don't be afraid to use it. I'll be at your side in an instant to help you calm down. But please try to get through it. It will help you. Whimpering a little after her broke their kiss, she nodded softly before laying her head against his. All right, but you promise you'll be outside for me. I will be, babe. So don't worry so much. Besides, before they start the sessions, they normally start finding ways to keep you calm. As such, I brought my CDs so they'll play them if you like. Naruto responded as he nuzzled her head gently. This tender scene was what Tsunade happened to see as she walked into the office, going to oversee the treatment herself for the first few times. She smiled warmly at the pair, hating to break them up for any reason. They looked good together, and the way Naruto looked after her, she knew he loved her deeply, and she could tell Yugito loved him just as much. She was just afraid to show it, especially now surrounded by new people. So how long are you going to stay over there and watch us, old hag? Naruto commented as he had heard someone enter, and having become familiar with her presence he was easily able to decipher it was Tsunade. Tsunade only grumbled. Naruto had indeed gotten better as he didn't even need to look to tell it was her. Ha, brat. I'm here to oversee the first few treatments. I'm also quite worried about what you told Iruka, so it might be necessary for me to be here all the time. Turning to see the Hokage, Yugito was unsure what Tsunade was talking of. She had to guess that Iruka had to be one the Anbu that arrived when she had begun to freak out. So what did Naruto tell? I see. You warned them of my strength.